Hello. I'm Ewen Spencer. How do you do? Design student at the University of Brighton. Designed this for me 10 years ago, and I'm still rinsing it. Design here. So thank you, Michelle, for doing that. I'm going to take you on a journey back to the 90s and beyond, ever so slightly. But I'm going to start by showing you some current work. This is a new project I'm working on at the moment for a magazine called Home Plus, and this is where I'm sort of placing a lot of my pictures at the moment and developing work and ideas. I'll start where I am right now and work my way back through to some older pictures, and we'll sort of, I guess, explore how pictures I made almost 20 years ago have sort of come back into my kind of orbit. This is actually pictures of my son. He's 19. That's him jumping off a rock. This is in, anyone from Newcastle upon Tyne in the audience? All right, Nan. That's good. Glad you could make it. So this is your grandson, and he's actually become a male model now. It was more to do with his mother than anything to do with me. But this is a kind of it is a fashion story, and it's a 3-part story. I've been making for Home Plus magazine called Caught by the River, and it's a kind of exploration, if you like, into my sort of journey through like style and music. Obviously I come from Newcastle upon Tyne, but the story has now ended up coming down into London via the Hoppings, which is a big fun fair in the northeast. It's in fact the biggest fun fair in Europe, and it descends upon Newcastle in June every year. It's a biographical story. I grew up near the town where the Hoppings happens and occurs, and I could hear it every evening. This is this kind of culmination of that story now. We moved down to Soho and end up here. So this next piece is a series of pictures about, if you like, it's about the late 90s. And has anyone heard of wavy garms here? It's quite popular, I believe. And in a way, it's also about that idea and a kind of, in terms of style, but in terms of wider culture also, a kind of a hunger for a sort of 90s, how would you say, like a flat roof pub sort of culture, where all of a sudden, a few years ago, we started kind of wearing, well, I didn't, but people started wearing Reeboks again, and, you know, I think people have started drinking Carling Lager again. That's going to come back soon. But the idea was we photographed these guys that had large collections of Moschino, Versace, this kind of amazing, incredible designer fashion for men and women, but in this particular case for men, that was probably intended at the time in the 90s for, let's say, affluent, globetrotting, possibly homosexual men who could afford this kind of clothing and wear it around the clubs of Europe. But of course it was adopted, this kind of clothing, by essentially working class men who were going raving in the mid-90s. And I captured that time, and I photographed it in the 90s and towards the end of the 90s and into the early 2000s. So what I started to do was I started to project these pictures into the contemporary, pictures of my son and other male models, and capture this idea without summoning up, I think, too much sort of nostalgia. It was an idea of pushing things forward a little bit. This again is for Home Plus. So this was a story I called Oh My Mosh. If you can see what I did there. Thanks. I'll hurry through this a little bit, but there's some other pictures here you can see where I've reintroduced my old pictures from raves with contemporary pictures of like sort of street style and modern manifestations of British kind of street youth culture. This was shot for the Brighton Photo Biennial. It's a project called Kick Over the Statues. The Brighton Photo Biennial is one of the largest photo festivals in Europe, and they commissioned a new work, and it was great fun. We installed it in custom-made advertising hoarding within a gallery, and we fly posted these posters on a huge format in the gallery. It was great fun. So I graduated from the University of Brighton, and I made these pictures, but these pictures were about the Northern Soul scene, and I'm just going to take you on a little journey now, as promised. These pictures were about the Northern Soul scene, which is something that I was a part of and still am a part of. So for me, it was a very sort of personal journey, which where I've kind of found my feet as a photographer. So this is about 96, 97, and I was making pictures of people I knew or didn't know in these kind of working men's clubs and peculiar venues around the UK, where we played rare soul music all night and would stay up late and dance all night. And there's people from very different walks of life in there. It's one of the most diverse sort of coming together of sort of people that I think I've ever experienced. I'm still a huge fan of rare soul music, but I don't get out as much as I did back then to make these pictures. So the Soul Project led me quite neatly, coming out of university, into a world that was sort of built on, as a photography student at that time, to go and make pictures of war, if you like, or go and make pictures of some sort of lifestyle thing for the Sunday Times, so the Independent. And that time I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in what I've always photographed, I think, which is kind of youth culture, style. I mean, you'd be surprised, but like music, you know, these manifestations of British, you know, which I think is very British. And I ended up coming out of university and working for this magazine called Sleaze Nation. This was at a time in the late 90s when magazines held a lot of power and influence. And they sent me out with a bag of film. Most weekends, they said, here's a bag of film, we'll process it on Monday. Just go out to all these parties, and they give me a list of parties to go and photograph in. So I'd kind of go out and creep up on unsuspecting people and capture them while they were having a bit of a neck on, as we say. I think they call it tash on now in Newcastle. If you watch the TV, you'll know about that. But I kind of travelled around all over the place, but mainly within London, within the M25. I'd sometimes venture out a little bit further and photograph a different sort of, when anything went really. Sleaze Nation magazine, it was good fun. It was like doing an MA for an extra 2 years and just finding myself in these funny little sort of nightclubs and basements, and confined until I've made a picture, really. And until I'd made a picture, I couldn't really leave, and then I'd go to the next one and grab another picture, and Sleaze Nation magazine would run them as a series in the back of the magazine. And it was a great sort of learning curve. So the Face magazine was the next port of call for me. I was very quickly picked up by them. They asked me to go to a club called Twice as Nice, which I'd already been going to actually a little bit, and that was in South London. And these pictures are from Twice as Nice in the main, but this is, so these commissions, for instance, for the Face magazine would lead to bigger sort of projects, if you like. So I got back into the habit of then spending a lot of time going back to these clubs. So the Face might send me for 1 or 2 evenings, and I'd realise that, crikey, there's something happening here. You know, there's no one sitting down, for starters. Everyone is dressed up. The hair is immaculate, the nails are done, and the girls look great too. And yeah, but thank you. And yeah, you're still awake. And for me, it felt as bona fide as something as important as like Teddy Boys or mods or kind of the rave scene or something. It felt kind of significant for me. It felt like something was happening. you know, people, you could feel the energy and the excitement that was going on. And it took me to places like Ayia Napa, where I photographed the kind of scene as it expanded and became more popular. And eventually, Ministry of Sound, good old Ministry of Sound, released 20 best UK garage bangers, and that was it. It was over. As soon as that happens, as soon as it's clocked by Ministry of Sound, you can guarantee the fun sort of, well, begins in a different way, but sort of certainly stops in another way. So, God bless Ministry of Sound. So we kind of, I think what we got was sort of So Solid crew and this kind of thing. I don't know if you know about that, but it was over. As a result, I ended up, the Face magazine then started sending me to put me in a time machine and sent me back to my teenage years. And they asked me to go and photograph at sixth form parties and discos around the UK. And this one was made in a place called Rosendale in Lancashire. And this work and the previous work, UK garage work, has kind of stayed with me. Like a kind of, I don't know what like, but it's kind of stayed like a good friend. It's sort of stayed with me. And it's been kind of close to me, and I've kind of really enjoyed making it at the time, but I think the kind of love of making it has kind of worked really. So the work, this work became something else. It became Young Love. But at the time, it was picked up by, from the magazine, it was picked up by a curator, and it was exhibited at the Barbican as part of a group exhibition. This is back in the day. And it was nominated by a sort of mentor and great friend of mine. This is Elaine Constantine, who made a great film called Northern Soul. This is the poster for Northern Soul. For an exhibition at Rencontre d'Arles, which was curated that year in 2004 by, this is Martin Parr. This is a really unflattering picture of Martin. Now, it was a wonderful experience to go to Rencontre d'Arles. I was a little bit like a duck out of water. And I was nominated for an award to produce a new body of work, and I suggested this idea about these kids I'd met in East London. And there were these kids making this kind of new, unlistenable, to me, music. And at the time, they called it all kinds of different things. They called it sub-low or just bass. Eventually, people started calling it bass line, and that kind of reared itself up again later on. But eventually, this work became known as grime, this scene. And in 2004, 2003, I started photographing these kids in East London and South London at pirate radio stations, in their mum's basement. They started at raves and in gigs. This was the project I'd suggested at Arles hoping to get a grant, and it didn't come to fruition. I lost basically. So I didn't feel bitter, and I ended up making this work into a book with the help of with a sportswear brand at the time. And this was my first book in 2005. This is Open Mic. Which I'm very proud of. It's a tiny little book, and I priced it $9.99 because I like saying $9.99 in my northeastern dialect. It was also about the price of a CD at the time, so it was quite sort of you could get it in your rucksack and things like that. The garage work a few years later also became a book, and this is the work here. This became ingeniously titled UKG. And this was a peculiar moment because this kind of really hit this book. It sold out in a few months. We made 1,000 copies of it through a publisher, which was a really wonderful experience. But this work was, at this time in 2013, was coming on for about 15 years, so 14 years old, and it just kind of seemed to hit the kind of the floor running. It was quite a bizarre experience because all of a sudden garage became kind of popular again in Dalston. And then, it's the epicenter of the earth, by the way. This is the Teenagers Project, and a similar thing happened with this work. Somebody came to me, a publisher, and said, I love those pictures of those kids kissing in nightclubs. We don't see that anymore, and that's probably, you know, for a good reason, but you're not allowed into those places anymore with a camera. But they wanted to have a look at the contact sheets, and which is, you know, how they were originally shot, and they edited through the pictures and produced this edit that I was, you know, a bunch of pictures that, you know, I'd lived with these pictures for almost 20 years now, and I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? 20 years, and they made a new edit that I hadn't seen before, pictures I hadn't really noticed, and we created this book, Young Love, which came out this year, and it's nice to see it. It's nice to see it in print. It's nice to see it sort of come to fruition, if you like, after all that time. And in a way, the purpose of what I'm saying really is about, a lot of people will come to me and say, oh, you know, how do you come about making a book? How do you make these pictures? What you know, the thing is that I've never really sort of took my foot off the gas, if you like. I've always sort of kept, there's a moral to the story, this is it. So I haven't really sort of took my foot off the gas, I just kept making pictures. Because I don't make pictures really, and essentially for anybody else. The truth of the matter is that I make these pictures, this one included. I make these pictures essentially for myself. Like they are, okay, all right. Okay. Essentially make these pictures for myself, and in a way, you know, one of the reasons pictures like this, or this, succeed, if you like, without being too obnoxious, is because we've all been there. We've all been one of these people, probably in this picture at some time or other. And I know I certainly have, and that's probably why I made the picture. So I'd like to thank you very much for this evening. I've gone way over time, but thank you very much for your time. Cheers.